This is the Unstarving Musicians Podcast. The podcast features conversations with musicians and music industry professionals, all intended to help musicians be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love, make music. Hey, it's your host, Robonzo. Thank you for tuning in. If you are an indie music artist or fan, you're in the right place. Whoever you are, I appreciate you. As a gigging musician and fan of live music, I'm committed to sharing my personal experience, including everything I'm learning from other artists and music industry professionals on this podcast. If you'd like to be privy to all of my learnings, pop over to unstarvingmusician.com and join the community. You'll get an email from me, usually weekly, with tips, insights, and secrets intended to make your music journey a little better and brighter. I'll never send you anything spammy, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Right. I am going to have to create a Unstarving Musicians Guest Hall of Fame with a special category for singer-songwriter Tom Meny. He's recommended some great guests, and here is yet another one. You are about to hear a conversation between me and Dean Johanesen. Not a Texas guy like so many of my other recent guests. Dean calls Florida home, and his brand of music is something special. My favorite genre label that's been used to describe what he does is Circus swing. He's done a lot of solo performance work, but also has a trio called the 24-Hour Men. In this conversation, Dean and I explore songwriter music festivals, different approaches to songwriting, learning what fans want, that's a big one, keeping a band together through expectations, and merchandise. The featured track of this episode is called Red-Eyed Red Light. It was written and performed by Dean with a little help from some studio cats. Here's me and Dean Johanesen. Dean, welcome to the show.
Hey, Roberto, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm very excited to have this conversation today, and a special shout out to Tom Meny for referring me to yet another interesting sounding and looking musician, yourself in this case. And before we hit record, I was mentioning to you that you're actually guest 3 of some of those that have been recommended by Tom Meny that I'm getting an opportunity to interview this week. So, wow, it's like you guys were, I don't know, like all meant to be here at the same time.
I think so, man. And he's such a great guy. I think it's no wonder that he's sending you people. Actually, when I listened to his interview afterwards, I was on the road to Tuscaloosa for a songwriter festival, and I messaged him and I said, "Hey, Tom, I just heard you on this podcast and it sounded great." And he's like, "Oh, man, you'd be perfect for that. Give me your information. I'll send it to Roberto." I was like, "Oh, wow." I wanted to assure him that I wasn't contacting him for a recommendation, just that I was so thrilled to hear a familiar voice and see that he was on your podcast.
Oh, yeah, he was great. Since we're talking about Tom, I feel like I've opened so many episodes with mentioning him, but I'm going to read something to you that he said to me in an email. So I don't know how you are compared to me or anyone else at accepting compliments, but here comes a big one. So just sort of brace yourself and then take it in, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So he says, the dude has a great style. He's always dressed up, nice pants, button-down shirt and tie, just class, and one hell of a cool dude. At the festival, you sometimes get lulled because everyone's playing all these folk or Americana songs. Then this dude breaks in with his up-tempo Django Reinhardt style, and everyone loves it.
That's awesome, man. That's nice. Very nice of him to say.
Yeah. Which festival was it that you guys had? Did you say it was at a festival that you met?
Yeah, it was out in Dripping Springs. There's a Dripping Springs Songwriter Festival just outside of Austin, Texas. It's quickly become one of my favorite things to do every year. I've made so many friends through that festival, and the people who put it on, Jim and Lori Halfpenny and this guy David, they do such a great job taking care of us, and they really go out of their way to promote original music, and the performers are just top notch. Like, you have to bring your A game at every round that you're in. They're just so good. They can sing well, they can play well, they write really good songs, and they're not just songwriters to pitch songs to other people, which I don't have anything against, but these are like working, performing, they're pros, and they're great songwriters. So it's a really cool festival to be part of. But that's where I met Tom.
And you know, silly thing is, I actually had that written down here right on my notes, and I was going to ask about it, but hey, we talked about it. So I'm learning, because I've had a number of folk and Americana artists on the podcast, I'm inadvertently learning things about the festival. So you mentioned pitching songs, and not to entirely differentiate them, I don't think that was your intention necessarily, but that side, and then the working touring guy that's just out or a girl that's just out there doing their thing because that's what they do. Sounds like a lot of musicians are there to kind of pitch and showcase themselves for people that might have interest in them in the recording or in the festival space.
To me, it just depends on what festival you go to. Basically, I started doing songwriter festivals like 3 or 4 years ago. I was in a 5-piece band, and when that band broke up, I went solo, and then I was just starting to do regional touring. And then I thought, we used to do music festivals as a band. I should maybe look and see if there are songwriter festivals. And of course, there are songwriter festivals. It just seems like it depends on where you're at. Like I did one, the Smoky Mountain Songwriter Festival up in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and it seemed like more people there were writing songs like they would say, hey, I kind of wrote this in the vein of maybe something that Toby Keith would cut or so-and-so would cut, Tim McGraw or something like that. It's more like a Nashville style and writing for maybe country artists to possibly get a cut on a record, which leads to mailbox money, the finances coming in from somebody, especially if you get a hit or something like that. And some of those festivals will feature somebody who's actually gotten some major hits, like Tommy Barnes is one of the guys that he wrote for Tim McGraw. He actually wrote Indian Outlaw. And it's really cool because he's one of those guys that will just kind of pal around with everybody. And before I met him and knew who he was just kind of hanging out at a big gathering at the hotel we were all staying at. We were all trading songs. And then I didn't know who he was. He's cracking jokes. And then somebody said, hey, Tommy, play one of your tunes, and then he sat down and played Indian Outlaw. And I was just like, that's the guy who wrote Indian Outlaw. It's like, this is amazing. You're like rubbing elbows with these people. And it's not my direction I don't think I write in that way. What I write is more personal or something that I want to explore. So I don't write in that way. But there are a lot of folks who do and do it really well and can make a decent living off of some of the royalties that they get from having a cut on a record. But it's just a different approach. And I found like in Dripping Springs, I felt like more of the artists are writing for themselves to perform those tunes. And that was a little bit more of something that I connected to personally and that I really enjoyed being around and was inspired and humbled by, in all honesty, too.
Was that your first time at Dripping Springs?
Yeah, that was like 3 years ago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I had met Jim Halfpenny, is a songwriter in his own right, and he was at the Mississippi Songwriter Festival, which I had done a couple years in a row. And I met him. And then when I applied to Dripping Springs, I didn't know he was involved initially. And then he emailed me back and he said, hey, this is Jim Halfpenny from Mississippi, and we're out here in Dripping Springs putting this festival together. And from year one, man, they just knocked it out of the park. It was just so well done. And I mean, I have them to thank for meeting such a great group of songwriters that travel around. And there's always somebody I can reach out to in a state, I feel like, through the Southeast and maybe out West a little bit, and say, hey, I'm coming into town. Can I sleep on your couch or something like that?
Yeah.
Not to always ask favors, you know what I mean? But a lot of guys, it's cool. Like I've had a couple guys come through and stay with my wife and I and be able to put them up and try to get them some gigs. And so it's a great community. I've heard the word tribe thrown around a little bit about that too. And I believe in that whole part of it. It's like we're all in the same boat trying to do something that we love. And I love to support other people that are doing that too.
That's cool. So Dripping Springs, 3 organizers, you said? 3 people that organize all that?
Yeah.
Is that kind of typical, or some of these festivals sound, the different ones I've heard about that are in the kind of folk and Americana genre, if I can just generalize there, some of them sound pretty big. I just had this impression that they were maybe organized at some sort of corporate, by some sort of entity as opposed to like 3 people.
This one, I think because they were just starting out, the 3 of them had the idea to do this. And they approached the small town of Dripping Springs, and there were enough places that were venues to actually pull it off, and they wanted to give it a shot. I kind of see it as maybe, like you think about maybe I don't know, the very early days of South by Southwest out in Austin, but I would imagine that it started as a small idea that people that love music and wanted to put together a festival. And then slowly but surely, if you have success the first few years, it starts to grow, and then you need a bigger team and you need bigger support. And I guess South by, I know a lot of people feel like it's gotten way out of control, but it's an amazing festival to take part of. And especially if I've never done an official showcase out there, but when you find the right showcases, and this kind of like the secondary showcases and the smaller ones that are put together where the music fans are actually going to really hear the music, when you find those, it's a great energy to be around. And I know it's a lot of traffic and everything, but the food is amazing and the music is awesome. People dance out in Texas, and it's great to be out there and be part of that.
Yeah, I have a few friends in Austin, but I have this one in particular who knows of the beginnings of South by Southwest, and I wish I could remember them very well, but he was telling me about the guy's house that it started in and the guy's name, and
Cool. Oh, wow.
yeah.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I hope I didn't side rail your question, but it's just the three people that started Dripping Springs, and I think the one in Mississippi has a little bit more of a team together, and Smoky Mountain probably the same thing. Those are the main ones that I've gone to. I did do it's another bigger festival that I did, which was completely more corporate. There was like a curtain, sort of like the Wizard of Oz is behind there, kind of working everything. And you don't necessarily meet everybody that's involved, but you work with the people that are at your stage, or you get the emails and work with it that way. So
this makes sense, and it's funny you mentioned South by because I was immediately thinking of it because of how it started. It was a small idea and it got really big. So I imagine that in most cases, or many at least, that's probably how it goes. You mentioned two different approaches to writing.
yeah.
Not in those words, but you alluded to the way you write. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you write?
It's kind of transformed over the years. I mean, the early stuff was very introspective, singer-songwriter kind of stuff, sort of focused on me and my emotions and my feelings and that kind of thing. And then I started writing about other people or other people that I'd come across or heard their stories about their lives that were intriguing or fascinating to me. And then I kind of got into this thing where I had done some really small, low-end kind of soundtrack work. There was a college student that wanted to use one of my songs in a student film, and I had asked him if I could take a look at the script and maybe give him some incidental music and maybe include a couple more songs. So he was thrilled because he had a little bit more of a soundtrack thing for his student film. And then I met another director who was doing film, and I wound up doing I submitted 3 of my original tunes, and then I worked on incidental guitar work, and then I played in some of the band formations that were doing songs. So then I started writing in that way. Like I would hear stories about history that were fascinating to me, and I started approaching it almost like writing soundtrack. The reason that I got into like Django Reinhardt and gypsy jazz and swing, I just started writing songs about, oddly, the circus. I saw my aunt after like 20 something years. We grew up in New York, and she was down in Florida. And for some reason, when I saw her, I remembered the story about her running away to join the circus. When she was a little girl, she got mad at her parents and threatened to run away. And for some reason, I wrote this song soon after seeing her called Circus Queen. And then there was actually a performer rather in the Ringling Brothers Circus named Lillian Litzel. And she was considered the Circus Queen. And then I kind of just started going down this path of like, why am I writing about the circus? And I live in Sarasota, so the Ringling Brothers built a lot of this area, and there's a lot of circus history in this area, and I started reading biographies. And then I thought the music as a background to these stories would make sense to be 20s and 30s era, like jazz and swing. That's kind of how I've been writing lately, is thinking about the full scale of the picture and the sound, the whole thing.
Had you already discovered this or become enamored with that part of history in the circus by the time you recorded A Time and a Place, or was it sometime after?
It was kind of after that. That solo record stemmed from being in this, I was in a 5-piece kind of acoustic rock-based band. And after a while, some of the folks that we knew were asking me to get back to like the stripped-down versions of the songs and the more personal approach. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, my fans are telling me what they want. Why not just give it to them? So I was like, all right, I'm going to go. I didn't intend to like go out solo in that way, but I thought I want to give the people that come out to see me what they're asking for. So I went in and recorded a solo record. And then about the time that it came out, the band had kind of run its course and started falling apart, and I had to sort of regroup. And I had started writing songs in this other vein, this kind of swing style vein, and just hadn't fully had the full like vision of it yet. So then I took I did like a 180 and like started writing completely different music and changed the style and the sound of everything that I do for the most part. Unless, of course, I'm going into what Tom was saying about kind of the upbeat thing. Like the one thing about the singer-songwriter festivals that I've noticed is like it's a lot of sad stuff. And I like sad stuff. I like meaningful stuff. I like people kind of really bearing their heart and soul in a tune. But if I'm the third or fourth person in that line of people who are performing songs, and I decide to play another sad song, I don't know what I'm going to do to the audience. It's like I'm trying not to kill the audience. I joke sometimes at these festivals that I'm there for comic relief because I have some of those myself. I've written songs about my grandfather who passed away and a friend of mine who died from cancer. But I'm kind of trying to choose the right time to lay those out. And if I'm in the right round, I can dig into some personal stuff like that, where if somebody else is playing something kind of upbeat and gives the audience a break, then I feel like I can dip in and change what I do. But this other style is just, I just love doing it. I love the way it feels, and I love the way it makes people move and respond to me and my songs. And so I'm kind of riding with that right now.
Sounds like it. When you said your fans were telling you what they wanted, was that by and large at your shows, or were there other channels by which you were already connected with your fans and you were getting some of these requests and feedback?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I've kind of jumped on like the importance of an email list and keeping in touch with folks, obviously before Facebook and before MySpace even. The old band that I was in Atlanta, we actually used to put out a newsletter, and a couple of the guys would actually print it, and then we would get together and fold it and stamp it and address it. And we would do it on Sundays. It was in Atlanta, and the Peach Jam would play local music on Sundays, and we would get together at somebody's house on a Sunday. We would do this monthly newsletter and pack all the information and whatever shows that we knew that we were going to be playing, and we would send those out by mail. So it's been a little bit, but through emails and through people at shows kind of telling me both. They'd send me a note, hey, I'd love to hear your song Purple Heart stripped down, or I'd love to hear your Sorry in the Meantime stripped down, or Godspeed or whatever at the show, or they would send me a message. And I thought maybe I should just do a collection of those songs that they're asking me for and strip them down and give it to them.
Yeah, I'm going to mention this for the benefit of those listening too, but so I just made the crazy decision to start another podcast.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All right.
It's based on this small business community that I've been community manager for almost 10 years. It's inspired by. And I find that with musicians and small business people, and I think a lot of people, and yourself included, will completely understand this, we have to pay attention to the same types of things. We have very similar types of challenges because musicians that are doing anything serious or trying to are basically entrepreneurial small business people.
Yeah.
But of interest to you, possibly, I invited a guest on, or I'm actually speaking to him this afternoon, but his episodes will publish with less frequency. But I saw a message from him in another community that we mutually belong to that he just reached 10,000 email subscribers. And I'm like, hey, I would love to talk to you. Just not because I need 10,000 email subscribers, although that would be great. But I am definitely feeling plateaued at this area of what I'm doing. So anyway, he's going to be on, and I think for anyone who's listening, and yourself included, it might be interesting. I'll put the podcast in the show notes and make sure that you can find it, and I'll mention the name of it right now. It's called the Partner for Leads Business Podcast. And you can probably just search me or Partner for Leads, which is actually partner singular with the number 4 LEADS, but I'll put it in the show notes. But I thought I'd throw that out there.
No, that's great.
Yeah, it should be super interesting. He also, I know months back, he hit a very significant milestone on his YouTube channel too, which also would appeal to musicians. And I don't recall if the number was the same, but he's done it like a second time now. He did it with YouTube, now he's on to email. But
oh man,
tell me a little bit, because I know it's going to be somewhat interesting, at least somewhat interesting. Tell me a little bit about your childhood and how music influences sort of crept into your life.
So my mom performed a bit. My dad is a piano player. My mom played guitar and sang a bit. And they didn't stay together when I was really young, so there was quite a bit of time we were apart. But my mom, I remember early days of my mom, she would let me sit on her lap and do the strumming, and she would change the chords and kind of like sing songs, and I just fell in love with it. And I had a cousin that played trumpet, and he would let me mess with his trumpet in his bedroom, listening to Led Zeppelin records. And I didn't know how to play it. I can't really, I've got a trumpet, but I can't really make a decent sound with it. But I was just fascinated by instruments, any instrument I could get my hand on. My mom listened to a lot of different kinds of music. She would listen to musicals, soundtracks to Broadway musicals, and she would Simon and Garfunkel and the Eagles and just tons of stuff. Led Zeppelin, just kind of all over the place. The soundtrack to Willy Wonka, like the Chocolate Factory, like just an odd mix, pretty eclectic mix of music. So that was kind of my early beginnings. And then when I was 12, I got my first guitar. I had seen Purple Rain, and I thought my first guitar looked like Prince's guitar in Purple Rain, which now I look at it and go, no, that doesn't really look anything like it. But
Mhm.
at the time, my bus used to pass it in elementary school, and I would see it hanging in the window, and I fell in love with that guitar and told my mom I wanted to take lessons. I had to learn how to play, So then I got my first guitar, and that was it. Like I fell in love with it. It took me till about freshman year of high school when I saw kids playing in bands together where it really made sense, because I think it became like having that social interaction with other people that were inspired to play music was important. When I got my first guitar at 12, it was a Mel Bay guitar book. It was funny because I listened to one of your other podcasts, and I think another guitar player had mentioned the Mel Bay books, and I had that flashback of getting that Mel Bay guitar book where you're just learning the basic notes and trying to play a G, C, and D chord, and there's not really much else, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. Like in your room by yourself, it's kind of hard, and you're not sounding that good. But then when I went to high school and I saw the band thing happening, I was just like, oh, okay, I get it. Because somebody who played the bass would be like, hey, I'm learning the bass line of this song, and oh, I'll learn the chords to that, and so plays the drums. Maybe we can kind of get a little trio going. Then it was exciting, it's like then you wanted to go home and learn and then come back ready to play those songs. So that's kind of the beginnings.
Do you know where your mom got her early music influences from? I'm assuming it was family, but do you know much about that?
I was pretty young when my grandfather passed away, but she used to tell me that he played violin and he sang a bit. And I vaguely remember him singing songs when I was really young. And my grandmother was into like old swing and jazz stuff too. She would kind of bounce around where we were living and sing a tune or two, Nothing major though. It wasn't like a regular part of their lives as I remember. My grandfather was the oldest of a big family, and their parents had perished in a fire. And he kind of took over being the father figure for everybody and keeping them out of trouble and making sure that they weren't in the bars, like take them to go get a job, that kind of thing. So music in that way became a secondary thing to him, but it definitely had an impact on my mom enough to kind of follow it and learn singing and playing and stuff. And my dad now too, I'd reconnected with my father, and he's full blown into teaching piano lessons, and he gigs about once or twice a month too. And so it's kind of cool. It's especially cool when you're not a part of the everyday, but it's still in your genes, it's still in your makeup. And you're like, I don't know where this passion came from about it, but it's there. And then you start to dig back like you're asking me, and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's been there.
Yeah. What type of music does your father play when he gigs?
I think he's kind of doing sort of standard kind of stuff.
As in jazz standard or pop?
Yeah, like jazz standards and basically jazz stuff, I believe, for the most part. He plays in a couple of assisted living facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So he's trying to dig into that older style of music as well and sort of dig back into what they might like to hear and what they might remember,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's been a cool thing for him. He's really enjoying it, and I think they really appreciate him coming in. And it's a cool gig, too, because I think he tells me that he brings an electric keyboard in. A couple of the rooms actually have upright pianos or grand pianos in them, so he shows up with his music and sits down and these different floors and stuff. So pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be nice. I realize as you were able to go back a little bit to your parents, obviously, and then the grandparents, that I really don't know about music in the lives of my grandparents, and if there was much, but certainly with my parents and my older brothers, there was always music in the background. And I wanted to mention, and I don't know if you have much to add to this, but I am amused and kind of tickled by your music influences, and there's a lot of them I'm not even going to mention, but I thought I wrote down from Ray LaMontagne to Fugazi, and then I had in parentheses, and Jimmy Page, and then 20s and 30s music, obviously, which you're talking about. And then from the way that you were probably largely self-genreified and then genreified by others, styles like Spanish rumba, instrumentals, speakeasy era, Americana, gypsy jazz, which we talked about, American roots, and my favorite, circus swing.
Yeah. I kind of coined that myself, and I've got a trio now that performs more of that style of music, and we're trying to decide if that's the right thing to say. It poses a question as much as it answers what we do. I started calling it circus swing because I'm really careful about calling what I do gypsy jazz, because the guys that play real gypsy jazz they're aliens. I mean, they're just so good. I take online YouTube lessons and I try to learn the style, but they've been playing it since they were just babies. I swear it's like they come out of the womb playing those guitars. It's just crazy. And some people have misquoted me and said, oh, gypsy jazz guitar player is going to be here for a gig. And then some people show up that love gypsy jazz and like, I thought you were gypsy jazz. And it's a very distinct style and a way of playing, but it's I think our sound is kind of a mix, or my sound is a kind of a mix of that and old swing, 20s and 30s, Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, little Western swing in there, the Lyle Lovett influence. I started calling it circus swing because I've written so many songs about the history of the circus and the sideshow that I wanted to kind of put that tag on it just to make it something different and unique. So we're still trying to figure out if that's the right thing, but that's what I'm running with right now.
Well, as we were talking earlier about the, I guess, 2012 album that you did.
Yeah.
And where your current sound is kind of taken over, I was just sort of imagining in my head, because what you do right now seems to me, for someone who's running in the circles that you run in, and probably to a lot of people who see you for the first time, it comes across as unique, I'm sure, and also very creative, not just from the musicality side, but also in your appearance and demeanor. And so I was imagining you or your bandmates being like, oh, it could be kind of like the Beatles were in their various transformations, because you've already gone through one. So now maybe you'll find another one.
Yeah, I think about it like I have an admiration for the artists of that caliber and that level. Bowie was another one who went through so many different really drastic changes and reinvented himself. And at this level, I don't know if it's the smartest thing to do.
Right.
But I don't want to be stuck. And even in digging into the swing thing, and I don't know, it's like I never want to be just thumbed down to one thing, because the reason I listed all those influences is because I love listening to all that music. It doesn't always come out in what I perform, but there are things about all of it that are so great. Somebody that listens to a punk record, maybe you wouldn't think they would like jazz stuff or classical, or I don't know. Like these days, I think it's pretty widespread, and it really honestly is in me. Like I like, depending on the mood I'm in and depending on the soundtrack I want to hear driving down the road, is the music I choose for the need. It's a need. And maybe it'll change from this swing thing. I have an idea to do something a little bit darker and bluesy, and I've been playing with some ideas with different vocal tones through different weird amps and stuff, and none of that stuff's seen the light of day yet, but maybe that'll be the next thing. I don't know.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, you have to keep doing whatever you're doing while it's fun, and when it's not fun, or if you just have the musical wanderlust, you start exploring other things, which kind of sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and I also want to be inspired. I think that different approach and the different mentality behind what you're doing might help write something new to you, maybe that you wouldn't have written. And a lot of it goes back to that wanting to be inspired to write new songs and maybe better songs and a different take on how to write a song, that kind of thing.
Yeah. The band that you mentioned, is that the 24-Hour Men?
Yeah, that's the new unit.
Yeah, I think I read this when I was doing a little research that, I know, I saw it on a radio station interview. There was this challenge of piecing together a band at some point in your touring life. So now you have at the moment, you sound like you have something that's kind of regular, and you're obviously very thrive in the solo setting as well.
Yeah.
Was there something special that brought about, or what was it that was special that brought about the 24-Hour Man and the desire to get back to, I assume, or having a band?
Well, I didn't set out to be a solo guy, so I definitely missed having that camaraderie of a band. That's one part of it. But I also, in doing the songwriter festivals, I started thinking more about just straight up music festivals as well. And some of the festivals that I was applying to were saying that they prefer to have like a group instead of a solo guy,
Yeah.
So that was one of the thoughts that I had. And then there was some other things that were going around here local. I've been in this area for a long time, and I think part of the importance of the reinvention is to have something where somebody doesn't go, oh, that's just Dean doing his thing. He's been doing the same singer-songwriter thing for years around here. To change the style and change the sound, and hopefully that will keep people interested in what I'm doing. But some of the music festivals around here require a bigger sound. So I thought starting to work in something would be good. And initially I had just wanted to do 45-minute sets to maybe hour and a half showcase style sets with these guys. But as we got into it and we were working really well together, they were interested in maybe booking more gigs and playing other places. And so I thought, well, yeah, I didn't necessarily want to drag you guys through the 3-4 hour gig situation, but if you're up for it and we're doing it kind of sporadically, it might stay fun for everybody. And that's an important thing after being in bands for years in Atlanta and then down here in Florida. I just want to make a better choices. And I don't know, technically consider myself a band leader, but I'm trying to approach working with a group in a way that's positive for everybody. I want them to have fun. I want them to feel invested, and I want it to be a good time. But I also want it to be something that we do seriously too. That was kind of my thinking behind putting the group together.
I find that interesting because from my own personal experience in playing in bands, but in talking to different people in different types of bands and bands that have been together for different amounts of time, and particularly it's with the ones that have been together for years.
Yeah.
It's fun to hear you guys talk. I realize the 24-hour man is a new thing, but it's fun to hear. You mentioned you've done a lot of bands, and it's really interesting to hear the little things that you all say that tells the story of how you sustain it and keep it fun. So yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure, like, because you're a drummer, I gathered from actually talking about it on the podcast, because I'm a fan of the podcast. But I can only imagine what it's. I'm a side guy. Part of the reason why I got into that rumba and Spanish style music is I'm a side guy. I'm a guitar player for a rumba duo, sometimes trio. And we play all Spanish style instrumental guitar. And I just play rhythm for this guy, Joe, who's actually studied the style and really has it down. I have a hard time with the traditional approach to strumming the right way, but I make it work the way I make it work, and we work really well together. But when I started playing with him, I started seeing what it was like to be the other guy. You know what I mean? Like, it's like if you're booking all the gigs and you're making all the plans and writing the tunes and doing all this stuff, it's like sometimes maybe you don't feel like you have much control. And when I started showing up for him and I would see him stressing out about the things that I used to stress out about, I wanted to kind of ease his mind about things and just show up and be a partner. Like, just like, what can I do to help? It's all good. We're going to have a good gig, man. Don't let this stress you out. I'll help you set up. We'll figure it out. And we work really well together. And we don't work that often, but it's a really enjoyable experience when we do. But it really put a perspective on being in a band and not trying to like guide a band through things. I know he's having to make tough decisions, and he's having to deal business, and he's having to worry about tax information and all that stuff when he's booking the gigs. So I've been there. I know what that's like. You know what I mean? So that gave me a different perspective on working with guys, and I wanted to remember that when I put another group together. It wasn't lost on me before, but it kind of drove that point home even more when I had the other experience.
Yeah, you make a really important point in telling that story, that as a side guy, as you say, you still have the opportunity to play a very important role, a different one than being the guy that's leading it all. And I've had, also reminds me of some of the guys I've played with in the past that are just so great at supporting everything around them, not just musically, but just in the way they treat everyone. And I think kind of comes along with what you were just describing of being empathetic toward your friend's situation and his stress. So that's very cool. Is there any chance that the 24-hour men will tour? Are the other two guys full-time players, or?
No, they both have. Our bass player, he actually played it with me in the last band that I was in called The Human Condition. He was the bass player for that band for a number of years. And then when I started thinking about putting the group together, he was I thought about bass right away, and upright in particular. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'd love to do this music with you, and maybe if you'd be interested in getting an upright. So he was just looking for an excuse to buy one, really. So it worked out great. So he jumped in. He's really great to work with. And then Max, the guy that plays percussion for us, he's a photographer, graphic designer, and he plays in a couple different groups as well. He actually does all my photography and most of my design work these days. He would be an occasional third for the Roomba duo that we were in, but I would sound check with some of my swingy kind of stuff when we were at gigs, and he would play along on he's got a cajon that he built himself with brushes. And I thought, ooh, that might be a cool thing. Instead of going straight up drums, is to do something more percussive and kind of quiet and low key, so we could kind of always have the songs sort of at the forefront and still have something interesting, unique to listen to. But I know I'm going off the rails again. But as far as touring goes, I'm not really sure what would be possible on full-length tours. If I think I've got us into a good music festival, I think they'd both be willing to make that happen and go play it. As far as the touring thing, I know our bass player he's on sabbatical in August, and he's telling me he'll play whatever gigs I want to play. So I have that kind of input from these guys. The cool thing is I know in advance now, I'm starting to get a feel, and I really want to create an open dialogue where if I'm looking into something that you're really not interested in, just let me know. Like, it's not going to be a big deal. I just need to know ahead of time so that I can make the right plans. And these guys are good like that, because I think in the past, maybe some of the miscommunication can lead to something almost volatile in a way, because if your passion and music means that much to you and you're really pushing hard to make some bigger things happen, and then somebody kind of, it's not in their makeup to do that and to be that, it can cause a lot of grief. And you can get really mad because it's like, man, this is what I want to do. Like, why don't you see it like I do? It's like, well, those aren't your songs. It's not your band. They've got other things to think about. So,
well, it's wise of you to think that way. Yeah, certainly anyone who's played long enough has been in the situation where it becomes an aggravation for one or more people. So,
sure, yeah.
Yeah, what a nice thing. And I'm sure that the career that you have established for yourself affords you the ability to do that. So it's not like the one thing necessarily that you're hinging your entire career on, as fun as it may be. That's nice. And I suppose taking one more step backward, that is also the result of you doing things that you really love, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, I want to exist doing things I love, because I think it just makes you, it makes you a better, kinder human being. You know what I mean? Doing music full time, it can have its ups and downs, but I've done a lot of other kinds of work, physical labor kind of work, and I've worked just as hard doing that and not had the same pleasure from it. So between gigging solo and gigging with the band and teaching music classes, and it's full time, but there's enough things that separate, so it's not just one thing all the time, that keep it interesting for me, and that helps out.
You mentioned your drummer in the cajon. So a friend of mine talked me into buying a cajon years ago, and I'm really thankful to him for that, because it opened up a lot of doors for myself and bands that I play with. But I just very recently took to mine with brushes, and I saw your percussionist doing that. Do you happen to notice he just used standard kind of jazz brushes, or did he have something special like plastic ones or anything like that?
They're plastic instead of the metal jazzy ones, and they work great. And he uses a timbal as a tom, and he uses a small splash cymbal. He's got a vibra slap for little effects, and he's got shakers on his feet and like a small tambourine thing on his feet. Then he's got one of those, the tambourine that's controlled by a foot pedal like a kick drum as well. The only thing that I think we lose sometimes is that low end thump from the kick drum. I've got a stomp box that I made myself that I've been trying to incorporate it once in a while, but we've been talking about also maybe he's been thinking about getting one of the foot pedals that actually operate the kick drum for the low end part of the cajon. So that's another thing. And he built that one himself. And it's cool because there's a door on the back, so it fits the timbal and the stands and yeah, it's brilliant. It's so funny. And he's got like a bottle opener on it and everything, you know. Wow. So he opens it back into that thing, and it's even got a mic port, but he puts all his secondary stuff in it, closes that up, and puts it on a cart, and he's out the door. You know, it's the quickest load in and load out from any drummer I've ever worked with in my life.
That's brilliant.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty smart. I have to put you guys in touch.
That would be great.
He's a cool guy.
I have some friends in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the drummer who I've known for a long time. They've been doing this acoustic, semi-acoustic kind of configuration. So the drummer's for many years spends most of his time playing percussion, but he built this box. Did you call it yours a beat box? I forgot what you called it.
I call it a stomp box, just that I hit with my foot. Yeah.
So this guy had built one, and it was really great. I think it was kind of big, but I saw him recently, and he just acquired a cajon that had a case that would act as a bass drum.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it was kind of small though, and I didn't stay around all night, unfortunately, so it's kind of an unfair judgment, but I was not like super, super impressed with the low end of it, but it was such a brilliant idea, and had I hung out a little longer, I might have heard more of what it was capable of, but it was a really neat idea.
Yeah, I've seen that done with suitcases too. I mean, what I do is I just go to a Goodwill, and I'll find a silverware box or cigar box. Cigar boxes are usually too flimsy, but every once in a while you'll find a box about the size of your foot, and I just take a paddle bit, drill a hole in it, stick an SM57 in there, and I wrap it with some cloth and just pad the box, and then I run it through a channel in the mixer, and I crank the low end, and I drop all the mids and treble, and I don't put any effects on it, and then I just raise the volume level enough to where you get that thud and that thump of what an actual kick drum would sound like. It's been working great. I know they sell them, but I was just being too cheap at the time, trying to make it affordable just to try out the idea. And it started sounding good. So I was like, I'll just run with this.
You never know when you're going to come up with something so good. You're like, hey, I think I need to patent this.
Right. Yeah. No, I know. I told our percussion player he should do that with the cajon, but he's just like, I don't have the time, man. I got a lot of other stuff going on.
Oh, it sounds like I'd love to see pictures of it. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is merchandise. I don't know how big of a thing it is for you, but I just happened to notice you have some what looked like new calendars. I saw some really nice looking t-shirt samples. I don't know if those came to life.
Yeah.
And I think there was something else, but I was just kind of curious, is that something that you're playing around with a lot all the time, or just I happen to see a couple of items?
Yeah, I'm interested in a lot of that stuff is regular. The t-shirts. Fortunately, Max, our percussion player, is such a great designer that I kind of talked to him about redesigning the logo or something like that, and he was all about making t-shirts. So we kind of got together. Those shirts did come out, and we pretty much sold out of those. They went really quick, and then we spent the extra money on really good quality fabric and really lightweight shirts for Florida. It's so hot. But yeah, I'm always looking into something. We host a prohibition night or a speakeasy night like twice a year at this place called the Hideaway Cafe in St. Pete, and everybody dresses up in like 20s and 30s attire, and I get a guy to come out and paint live during the show, and we raffle that off at the end. And I run a slideshow and all this stuff. But one of the big things is I try new merch out sometimes at those shows as a special gift to people that come out. And I think one time we did logo sunglasses, and then another time we did shot glasses with our logo on it. I don't know. The way I look at it is just I want to make it a fun thing and have something memorable for people to walk away from. And those shows provide a kind of a screening for what we're thinking about and what our audience responds to. And if they respond really well to something, then we keep up with that. But I like having new stuff for people to take home, and just maybe remember the night, remember the show, something special. I know that you've talked a number of times about CDs and physical copies of discs and stuff. And it's weird because I went through a phase where I was reading articles about where the music business was going and maybe some of those DIY style interviews and all that stuff on YouTube. And we went at one point and released a digital download sticker instead of a physical CD. And the response that we got from most of our audience was they were still wanting a hard copy of the disc. So I think it's important to know your audience as far as the music part of it goes and the physical copies and whether you're going to do a digital thing. I think our audience is a little bit on the older side and prefers to have a hard copy, even if they get a digital download card with it, or if they're just going to upload it to a computer or something like that. So I get short runs now of 100 discs at a time, and I still sell through those. I don't know how, they don't go super fast, but every once in a while I'll play a festival and I'll unload a bunch, and then I play a lot of restaurant gigs and solo gigs and markets and stuff. I tend to sell more stuff at markets than other places, but as far as music goes, I'm still kind of having to rely on physical copies right now.
Good information, man. I think it's good to know. And like you said, know your audience. And I suspect it's kind of like you said, if the crowd's a little bit older, that probably is a good indication that they are going to have interest in physical copies over a super young audience, if I can just use those words. And I think Tom Meny kind of said it really well, and not his exact words, but I think that there's sort of a sentimental transaction going on when they pick something up that is part of you.
Yeah, he made a good point with that, actually. What he was talking about, buying a CD that might not ever listen to it, but he wants to support the artist. And I've got probably a couple shelves full of artists that I've performed with. And a lot of times we swap CDs and I look them up online and listen to it. But I listen to everybody that I get a CD from. I at least let it go. I still have a truck with a CD player in it, and I make sure that I listen to their disc once or twice in the truck before I put it on the shelf. I do listen to it, but yeah, I think that he was onto something with people wanting to take something home and have that connection with you. And I also know that it just seems like with the digital thing, especially with the download cards, I feel like they got to just get washed away. I'm not saying that they're a bad thing, but for my audience in particular, because those cards, you are able to see when somebody downloaded the card. And for the amount of ones that I've given out to where I get the notice of people actually downloading, it doesn't always kind of compare. I think they treat it like a business card.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gets lost. So I thought the sticker was a good idea. But again, I think knowing my audience, and I ask them for every release, put out something on Facebook. What do you guys want? What do you think? Are you into the download thing? Do you want CDs? I kind of feel like you have to do a little bit of everything to appeal to, especially if your audience is widespread. Just figure out what they want and figure out a way to make it happen for everybody out there.
Yeah, no, it's excellent advice. I've heard other artists say something very similar. And like I was mentioning earlier, small business people and music artists, the same challenges, a lot of the same advice applies. And so I've heard that in the outside of the music, but in the general business world, yeah, I know it's good advice. And it's great to hear people like you actually say it on this podcast, because so many times we have to hear it 20 times before, like, of course, yes, I need to pay attention to that small detail and take care of it. Hey, Dean, thanks so much for spending time with me on the podcast, and tell everyone your website. I know that it's a central hub for you, which is very smart of you. What's your website so they can find out what you're up to?
It's deanjohanesen.com, and that's DeanJohanesen.com. And I'm on Facebook, and Instagram has kind of become a little bit more of a main thing. I really like that. And I like it because it's one of those hubs where you can share on Twitter and Facebook. So I utilize that a lot. I like having the imagery and being able to share that imagery on the other platforms and just write something small that everybody can kind of see what's going on. But between that and the website, people are welcome to find me on the personal page or music page or whatever. Reach out, say hello. Be happy to hear from anybody.
Cool. Well, I highly recommend, if you're listening to this, to check out Dean's music. You can find him pretty much anywhere you can find, including on his website, anywhere you can find great streaming music. And Dean, thanks again for your time. I know I'm going to have some follow-up fun with you, and look forward to staying in touch, man.
Yeah, man, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for what you're doing. I really enjoy listening to your podcast very much.
I really, really appreciate that. Thanks, man.
Sure. Have a good one, man.
My dear friend, there's some folks who meet the red, sliding down the rails from town to town. You'd better pull your weight, or the heavy hand of fate will throw you out the boxcar to the ground. Red light, good night. Set 'em up and break 'em down. The greatest show around is in and out of town tonight. You'll move your funny bones, tingling from the sound through the megaphone. City home humming when you hit the road, alright. Red light, good night. Old Camel got the jake from the walker's heated take. We tried our best to keep it down low. Rumors are disease, and they spread with careless ease, bringing certain someone's in the know. Red light, good night. Set 'em up, then break 'em down. The greatest show around is in and out of town tonight. You'll move your funny bones, tingling from the sound through the megaphone. City home humming when you hit the road, alright. Red light, good night. Old Topsy got the juice from a madman on the loose. A shocking truth the wizard used to prove a petty point. What was it he did say about nonviolence in his day? Let it be shown that actions pulse more true than words. Have you heard? Red light, set 'em up and break 'em down. The greatest show around is in and out of town tonight. You'll move your funny bones, tingling from the sound through the megaphone. City home humming when you hit the road, alright. Red light, good night. Red light, good night. Red light, good night.
Hey, thanks again for listening. The Unstarving Musicians podcast is edited for sound and content quality by Juan Perez. The intro-outro music is Alarm Clocks, written and performed by Redwood. That's me on drums. Visit unstarvingmusician.com/podcast to find more episodes like this one. And please consider supporting the podcast by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. This episode was powered by The Unstarving Musician's Guide to Getting Paid Gigs, How to Get Booked and Paid What You're Worth Over and Over Again, available on Amazon and Kobo.com. The book is also available as a standalone podcast called The Unstarving Musician's Guide Podcast. You can also learn more about the book and companion podcast at unstarvingmusician.com/book. I'd love it if you picked up a copy, and I'd love it even more if you left a review. With much gratitude, peace, love, and more cowbell.